The Tower of Babel, when the world spoke one language, the origin of nations and languages. When the planet was still young and shivering with the memory of divine judgment, it was in the early days after the Great Flood. This occurred a very long time ago. All of the people who lived on earth were descended from a single man named Noah, who had escaped the flood along with his 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. The process of repopulating the world began with the passing of successive generations. There was still only one language that was spoken, a common tongue that made it easy for everyone to communicate with one another. In addition to being a common dialect, this language is also referred to as the Edomite language, which is also known as the language of Adam or even the language of angels, according to many different tales. It was considered to be unadulterated, unblemished, and that God had bestowed it upon the first man in a direct manner. They eventually traveled eastward and settled in a large plain in a land known as Shinar, which was an ancient region in Mesopotamia. This occurred as the people continued to multiply and spread over the region. Here the people became more courageous as a result of the leadership of a guy named Nimrod, who was both powerful and ambitious. It was said that Nimrod, who was a descendant of Ham and the great-grandson of Noah, was a powerful hunter and king. But he was also known to be a man who was filled with pride and his own stubbornness. The very name of this individual, Nimrod, connotes defiance in Hebrew, and in Aramaic, it makes reference to a person who exalts himself. And that is exactly what Nimrod did. The towns that he had constructed, such as Akkad and Babel, were not enough for him to just rule over them. The sovereignty of the ground was not the only thing he desired. He also desired dominion over heaven. Inspired by a vision of human greatness and troubled by the fear of death, Nimrod gathered the people to construct a monument unlike any that had ever been constructed before, a tower that would penetrate the sky and soar to the very realm of God. A terror that had been ingrained in the hearts of mankind was left behind by the flood. They were aware of the fact that death was unavoidable and that life was no longer going to be immortal as it had appeared to be in the days of Methuselah, who had lived for almost 1,000 years before. When confronted with the reality of their own mortality, the inhabitants of Babel started to wonder, why are we at this place? What is the point of living if death is waiting for us at the day's end? They yearned for a legacy that would endure beyond the passage of time and the evaluation of others. Nimrod also presented them with a vision, which was that of a unified humanity that shared a single name, a single goal, and a united construction. As a result, the people started their task. Because there was a scarcity of stone on the area, they came up with a novel solution. They baked bricks out of clay and bound them with tar. In addition to being a construction project, this was also an example of technological innovation, which is a sign of the growing intelligence of humanity. It was a question that lurked in the background. Would this newly acquired information be used for good or for evil? When it came to the answer, the builder's spirit was to blame. As per the ancient Midrashic legend, the individuals responsible for constructing the Tower of Babel had become so preoccupied with their work that they regretted the loss of a single brick more than they mourned the loss of a human being. They were so upset that they would cry if a brick were to fall from the tower and break. If, however, a worker were to fall and die, they would simply replace him. Over time, the tower had evolved into their deity, their idol. The monument that they were creating was more important than the life of a citizen. God had a clear view of the situation. In the past, the unity of the people had been a beautiful representation of harmony. However, it had now become a power that was harmful. By working together and communicating in the same language, they were now constructing a future that was founded on pride and defiance. Bricks and a tower were not the only things at play here. The concept revolved around the human heart's pursuit of divinity on its own terms, apart from the presence of God. However, God, in his infinite wisdom, made the decision not to wipe off humanity once more, as he did during the deluge. Instead, he attacked the source of their pride, which was the language that they all spoke together. It was as if the people who were building the Tower of Babel suddenly found themselves unable to communicate with one another. The confusion quickly spread throughout the area. Suddenly, teams that had previously worked together in perfectly coordinated fashion plummeted into chaos. instructions degenerated into a jumbled mess. Due to the fact that the project was suspended, the enormous tower which had reached such a height remained unfinished. After that, the location was given the name Babel, which is a word that has a profound and sardonic connotation. In ancient Sumerian, the word Babel meant gate of God, which signified a gateway to the divine. In contrast, the Hebrew word Babel eventually came to be used to mean confusion. In the process of becoming a symbol of divisiveness and divine intervention, what was intended to be a monument to human glory became otherwise. Because of the division in language, the people were also split. As they dispersed over the globe, they established the nations and civilizations that we are familiar with today. It has been speculated for a long time by linguists and biblical scholars that the languages that were born at Babel were the ones that gave origin to the major language families of the globe. These language families include the ancient Hamido-Semitic group, which is associated with the descendants of Ham and Shem, and the Indo-European family, which is linked to Japheth's lineage. These languages have developed and shifted over the course of several centuries, influenced by factors such as location, culture, and the passage of time. Many languages, however, still hold elements of the original divine language that was spoken before the Tower of Babel. These remnants can be found in the sounds and patterns of Sumerian, Akkadian, Hebrew, Aramaic, Sanskrit, Greek, and even Chinese writing. Some people believe that these writings encapsulate symbolism of biblical stories such as the deluge in Eden. In old mythology and occult rituals, these ancient tongues are frequently used as a bridge to forgotten knowledge. Sometimes in defiance of God, like Nimrod did in the past, they are used as a means of communication. When it comes to Christian traditions, however, ancient languages are cherished not because of their defiance, but rather because of their proximity to the sacred. Hebrew, Greek, and Latin are examples of languages that draw the faithful closer to the divine through prayer and liturgy. These languages are not used to replace God, but rather to worship Him. Even in modern times, the Tower of Babel continues to be a fascinating story about the contrast between human ambition and divine power. It serves as a cautionary tale about the perils of hubris and the delusion of being self-sufficient. The fact that unity without humility and advancement without obedience might lead to chaos rather than greatness is brought to our attention by this observation. Nevertheless, it also reveals something else to us, which is that God's purpose continues to be carried out even when there is dispersion and uncertainty. The nations of the earth would one day come from the scattered peoples of Babel, and from them would come a Savior who would unify the hearts of men, not through language or towers, but rather through grace, truth, and love. They would come from the nations of the earth. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel.